Hello everybody, this is Lesson 5, Part 1, Rec 250 Online, Summer Session 1, and this is Lesson 5, Part 1. Lesson 5, Part 1, and what we're going to be looking at in this segment is risk and challenge, and what the differences between the two, and most importantly, how is risk and challenge used to bring about learning and growth in the groups that you are leading. And there can be risk and challenge in a seminar, in a team building program, in an adventure, backpacking trip, or just in a conference room. So they're just various degrees of risk and challenge. So to go ahead and start, let me talk about the reading first. For this lesson 5, looks like I have 3 chapters for you to read, and these chapters are on the process or understanding facilitation, or the role of the facilitator. And that starts chapter 14. It's on page 184. So you go through chapter 14, go through chapter 15. Chapter 15, which starts on page 198, and then go through chapter 16, Advanced Facilitation Techniques, which starts on page 214. And then that goes all the way through to chapter 17, which would be the final chapter, so 4 chapters here, and that's Facilitation Roles. That ends on page 239. The book in the library might have slightly different page numbers because it might be an older version, but there's not that much difference. So go ahead and look at those 4 chapters on the facilitation, and you'll see some questions on the final in those chapters. But as for the midterm, I'll go over the majority of the material, as well as, or the material that's in the note packet will be on the final as well. So talking about risk, there's 2 types of risk. There's perceived risk and there's actual risk. Actual risk is your statistical, I would say proven, but there's a statistical analysis to, if you go driving X amount of days in your life, your chances of having an accident are a certain percentage. Okay, and there's real actual risk when driving a vehicle, and how much actual risk really is there, because what you have to do is separate actual risk from your perception of risk. So you may be frightened to get on the freeway when you first learn to drive, okay, or frightened to leave the state or something like that, and you're afraid of the car breaking down, or you're afraid of getting in an accident, or you're afraid of something that is risky. That's perception of risk, because that might not happen, and you don't really know the chances of that happening. So actual risk is something that usually can be quantified, something that's very measurable. So you'll be able to measure the amount of actual risk in a particular program. Say, for example, if you're in a leadership role and you're taking groups rock climbing, there's a certain amount of actual risk. But when you compare that level of actual risk compared to the actual risk of, say, driving in a 15-passenger van on Highway 99, for example, you actually have a higher actual risk in driving the van of an accident occurring than one occurring in rock climbing if all conditions are met. So really what we're looking at is a leader always wants to keep the actual risk threat down. So those are those physical safety parameters that we talked about in the full value choice contract. When we talked about that contract you set up with you and your group, and you might say, well, how do I set up that contract in a seminar? You can set up that contract more non-verbally with your group, just showing that you are interested, that you care about the safety, and you let people know anything from where the restrooms are to how long we'll be in session for. I mean, that all communicates that I'm looking out for your needs, and there's a physical safety element there. Now, obviously, in adventure programs, there's more of a physical safety concern. But getting back to to perceived and actual risk. What you have in that rock climbing program is, you have a certain amount of actual risk. Let's say 25% out of 100 is your actual risk that somebody's going to get physically injured. So what you do is you do your best to minimize that risk by setting up the correct safety systems, by making sure that everybody understands the safety parameters and the safety guidelines, by backing your systems up, by doing everything that you need to do on a technical basis, so that you've absolutely done your absolute best to minimize actual risk. And that's actually what you're responsible, because you're responsible to and not for. So you do your absolute best with your training and your knowledge. Obviously, you have to have the right training. Okay, so you can't just say, oh, well, I did my best and I'm responsible to and not for. That's not what I'm talking about. You have to have absolutely the correct training. If you're leading a group of folks rock climbing, you have to know exactly what you're doing and be certified and be accredited. Your company has to be accredited and prepared, and et cetera, et cetera. Risk management plan. You have to have all those in place. Then, once you do all that, then you're responsible to and not for, because if somebody doesn't like your rock climbing program, then that's not necessarily about you. If you set up the appropriate opportunity, a good learning environment, and all of the safety systems correctly. Now, assuming that you've reduced the actual risk, and that's the goal, is you want to use a risk to your advantage. You see, when somebody has to take a risk, and most people think, well, a risk is something physically dangerous, and that's not true at all. In fact, most risks that we refer to, 85% of those risks are emotional risks. People are taking emotional risks, especially in the outdoor environment, in the adventure environment. Emotional risks where they're disclosing something about themselves. They're opening up and saying, oh boy, I really need to change this. That disclosure, that appropriate disclosure, that vulnerability is absolutely essential to move somebody into a process of growth. And if they can't or will not see the value in taking risks and take them, then there's no growth for them. And we'll get to that more later in this lesson about the importance of, or how somebody takes an appropriate risk. But we're not quite there yet. So talking about actual and perceived risk. Actual risk, you want to do everything you can to make that absolutely as low as possible. But there's nothing wrong with having a high perceived risk, because a high perceived risk actually assists you. I'll give you an example. If anybody's been to a challenge course, or maybe some of you students have been to the challenge course already at the NAU, which you can still do if you haven't decided to do it yet. It's a great experience on your own time and on your own dime, but it's absolutely worth it. Plus, you get out of the paper, or you get out of the last test. Somebody walks onto the challenge course for the first time, and they see 60-foot tall climbing tower and various cables and poles and ropes and all this stuff dangling in the air. That's pretty intimidating. However, the death rate on the challenge course in the last 40 years is less than 1%, meaning that the only times that folks have actually died on a challenge course has not been because of a equipment malfunction. It's either been because of instructor negligence, where they set something up wrong, okay, or the number one cause of death is cardiac arrests. People get up there and they're couch potatoes, and they haven't done anything for years, and they get up and they start climbing the wall, and they feel a lot of pressure to do it, and there's a whole lot of ethical issues about that we'll get to later, but all of a sudden, they have a heart attack. So it's not the equipment and the system, the ropes course, challenge course system that's set up that has ever caused a death. A 9/16 galvanized steel aircraft cable does not fail, and when it's regularly inspected and replaced when it needs to be replaced, you just don't have a problem. So see, that's low actual risk. So when you look at how many people have died on a challenge course because of equipment failure, there's a zero. Okay, 40 years and zero. That's a great record. That's a very low actual risk. Now, you always have instructor negligence, because people can set things up wrong. It's humans that make the mistakes. So you're always going to have that. So there's going to be deaths. People die from all sorts of things, from choking on their hot dog at the hot dog stand, to because they didn't chew their food well enough, or whatever. So you've got this group that shows up to the challenge course for the first time. They look up at the cables and look up at the ropes, and they're like, whoa, and they get nervous. Okay, they get butterflies in their stomach. Okay, that is perceived risk. What they're doing is they're looking at that and they're saying, oh my gosh, I'm nervous, I'm scared, this is scary. I gotta take care of this. And so what they do is they have a natural system that comes up, and that system is called the fight or flight response system. And I'll come back in the next video and talk about the fight or flight response system and how someone deals with risk and how you deals with perceived risk and how you can utilize that perceived risk to your advantage to move somebody into the learning process, the growth process that they need to be in. I'll see you when I get back.